Also the president of SFN Bangalore chapter. So I hand over this to Dr. Satyaprabha ma'am to introduce the speaker.
Good morning. At the outset, I thank Dr. Bindu Kuti for giving me this opportunity to chair this session. And I also thank Dr. Arun introducing me. And namaste to all delegates. It's my privilege to introduce today's keynote address by Sri Swami Atma Priyananda. He is the first chancellor of Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Education and Research Institute deemed university. He served as a founder vice chancellor of this university for more than 15 years before his being appointed as pros chancellor. Under his leadership, the university has raised to acclaim the heights and has awarded full membership of Global University Network for Innovation, a European-based global organization network university with a social commitment. Ramakrishna Mission University is envisioned by Swami Vivekananda, trying to actualize the Swami Vivekananda educational vision and devoted to teaching and research in a variety of unique gap areas that are scarcely addressed in any other conventional university. Sri Swami Atma Priyananda has received his MSc in Physics, PhD in Physics from University of Madras for his work in practical theory. Later, as a monk, he taught physics nearly for 25 years, besides as the head of the various educational institutes. Recently, in February 2021, he has been awarded prestigious DSC award by Indian Institute of IIT Technology from Kharagpur for his outstanding achievements. He is a very frequent invited speaker to the several conferences. You must be knowing why everybody will call him, because of his talk and his popularity of the material what he uses in his talk. And Swami Atma Priyananda also interact closely with world religions like Sri H.S. Dalai Lama, particularly in his work through Mind and Life Institute. Dr. Swami Atmananda Priya has been traveling extensively across the globe, trying to further the cause of the world peace and the harmony. Sir, we are very, very happy and honored to have you here as a keynote address. We welcome you for the talk, sir. Namaste.
So you can unmute yourself, sir.
Please unmute yourself, sir.
Okay.
So may we begin with the traditional peace chant called the Shanti Mantra. These are mantras which are prefixed and suffixed to the Upanishads. And although in Sanskrit they are universal in character, one well-known Shanti Mantra which is used at the beginning of any educational enterprise like this, wherein the teacher and the taught, the preceptor and the disciple sit together one-on-one and invoke the blessings of the Supreme Being for the success of their joint endeavor. I will chant the original mantra in Sanskrit. It occurs in the Kathopanishad, and give a simple translation and then proceed. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Supreme Being protect us both, the teacher and the disciple, by revealing to us the true nature of knowledge. May the Supreme Being protect us both, the teacher and the disciple, by revealing to us the application of that knowledge. May we both strive together for the cultivation of knowledge. May the knowledge and the wisdom that we cultivate be effective and illuminating for the good of mankind. May there be no dissension or disharmony between us. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Our salutations to Swami Vivekananda, the king among renouncers, the luminous sun of knowledge, and the embodiment of existence, knowledge, bliss absolute, and the remover of all miseries of mankind. Space, time, consciousness, matter. These are objects which have been fascinating the human mind millennia upon millennia. There are certain objects, concepts, which we know too well to be defined or explained. We know what is space, we can't define it. We know what is time, it is in their bones, but we can't exactly pinpoint and say it is this. And interestingly, materialistic science, physical sciences, which swear by matter, do not exactly know how to define matter. As a matter of joke, in school physics we used to read, matter is something which occupies a space. Then a student asked, "Sir, what is space?" "Oh, space is something which is occupied by matter." So we go round and round in a cycle without being able to define both. Is it possible to define matter independent of consciousness? Can you say matter is something which is perceived and known by consciousness? Or is there a definition of matter independent of consciousness? These questions have been agitating the thinking minds since time immemorial. And consciousness, once again, is a very difficult term. You can't define it because you are it. And one fundamental clarification with which I'll begin is that the Western thinking, they mixed up life and consciousness. In the Indian philosophical wisdom, we distinguish between life and consciousness as two separate entities. Life is Chetana, Prana, and consciousness is Chaitanya. This distinction should be borne in mind, particularly in the modern neuroscientific and neurophysiological researches. They confuse consciousness with life itself. Somebody is reacting to a stimulus. A reaction to a stimulus may not be a sign of consciousness, but could be a sign of life. So what is the overlap between these two? Are they different? Or do they form a continuum? Secondly, the difficulty about defining these things is English is a very, very poor language to express philosophical thoughts, particularly in the Indian context. Unfortunately, we have to use English. Sanskrit is the most scientific and most suited language for explaining philosophical concepts. Like German and English now are most suitable for explaining scientific concepts, not Sanskrit. It was Swami Vivekananda, whose quote I begin auspiciously. His pioneering work leading the consciousness studies and research in the Western world more than a century ago There's a wonderful statement which he made in a letter which he wrote to Alasanga Perumal, his dear Madras disciple, spontaneously, 17 February 1896, in which he wrote, to put the Hindu ideas into English and then make out of dry philosophy, intricate mythology, and queer, startling psychology, a religion which shall be easy, simple, popular, and at the same time meet the requirement of the highest minds is a task only those can understand who have attempted it. The dry, abstract Advaita must become living, poetic in everyday life. Out of hopelessly intricate mythology must come concrete moral forms. And out of bewildering yogism must come the most scientific and practical psychology. And all this must be put in a form so that a child may grasp it. That is my life's work. The most difficult thing is how one can put the most complicated concepts in a simple language. Scientists as well as philosophers, academicians have an uncanny knack of making simple things complicated, presenting them in such a way that nobody understands. And that is called scholarship. And that is one reason why seminars and symposia, though popular, leave the listeners with little takeaways. So I will, following Swami Vivekananda, try to make extremely things simple, direct, and related to our daily life. I will begin by giving some fundamental ancient Indian perspectives. And this will be the basis of our entire discussion. The Panchakosha, the 5 selves. The Upanishad per se does not use the word kosha. It uses the word 5 selves, Pancha Atma, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya Atma. We'll have this at the background, and then some more perspectives I'll give, and then go back to science and how these can be combined. There's an ancient Indian yoga tantra tradition. There are hundreds of traditions in India in the spiritual and philosophical wisdom, Vedanta being the most prominent as taught by Swami Vivekananda. And yoga tantra tradition is equally powerful, and they use different language, but there's a lot of overlap of ideas. Yoga Tantra tradition talks about Shat Chakras, 6 centers. The Mooladhara Chakra at the base of the spine at the bottom, the Swadhisthana near the genital organ, Manipura, the navel, Anahata, the heart, Vishuddha, the throat, Agya, between the eyebrows. So how these can be related to the 5 selves is a question which can be discussed. And one more Vedanta perspective, which is related to this, is Avasthatraya, the 3 states of consciousness. When we talk of consciousness or life, manifestation of life, we should remember that we normally concentrate overmuch on the consciousness in the waking state. I am now awake, and all of you hopefully are awake and will remain awake till the end of my lecture until I manage to put you to sleep, which we'll try to do, not to do. Because the most important task of a teacher is to keep the audience awake, as they say. This is the only state of consciousness in the Western world concentrates upon. Of course, NIMHANS is doing a lot of work on sleep. And there is another state which is called a dream state, which is not understood. Freudian and other schools of psychology have tried to understand mind in so many different swapana, dream in so many different ways. And then again, there's a deep, profound sleep without a dream, dreamless sleep. Whether consciousness is there in a dream and deep sleep, what kind of consciousness, how they are manifesting, these are questions which have been raised, and elaborate, in-depth discussions are available in the Upanishads and Vedanta on these three states of consciousness called waking, dream, and deep sleep. And the Vedanta says, in the waking state, your consciousness is completely outward focused, operating through what they know the indriyas, the sense organs. And in the dream state, your consciousness is completely inwardly focused. Antah pragya, that's the term which is used. Waking state, it is bashish pragya, outwardly focused. Dream state is antah pragya, inwardly focused. What about deep sleep? Then they come out with a wonderful terminology out of experience. Here, the pragya, consciousness, is neither outwardly focused, nor is it inwardly focused. It is not focused at all. It is unfocused, amorphous mass of consciousness. Prajnana, the terms used in the Mandukya Upanishad. Waking state, Jagrata, is Bahish Prajna. Dream state, Swapna, is Antah Prajna. And deep sleep, Sushupti, is Prajnana Ghana. Then they ask the question, is there a state beyond these three states in which consciousness is neither Antah Prajna, nor Bahir Prajna, nor Prajnana Ghana, nor is it a combination of these two, these three? And what is the state of consciousness that transcends this Antah Prajna, Bahir Prajna, and Prajnana Ghana states of consciousness? Does such a state exist at all? If it exists, what is the nature of that consciousness, which Swami Vivekananda described in the modern times as super consciousness? In those days, the Freudian psychological terms were extant. Conscious, subconscious, unconscious, and so on. Swami Vivekananda added the term superconscious, which fascinated then psychologists like William James, who wrote the famous book, Varieties of Religious Experience, after he met Swami Vivekananda. And this superconscious state is called in yoga as samadhi, and in Vedanta, they call it samyak jnana. Buddha also uses the word samyak jnana, and in which consciousness is completely outwardly, inwardly, not focused, not remaining as amorphous mass, but transcends all relativity, remains as infinite and absolute. Swami Vivekananda challenged the West, saying that I will enter into the state of superconsciousness, and you doctors, you test me. He did it, they examined him and said, science doesn't know anything about it. It happened to Sri Ramakrishna also, when he went into Samadhi, some doctors went and tested him. You know, the confirmatory test of a person's death is that you put your finger in his eyeball and then scratch it. If there is absolutely no reaction at all, then you declare the patient to be dead. It was done to Ramakrishna, and he was declared clinically, medically dead. And after a few minutes, he came back to the natural state, started dancing and singing. That is the glory of the Indian wisdom, which has challenged thinking people all over the world by saying that there is a state of super consciousness which can be reached, attained, and realized. In the modern times, we have the example of people like Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi in the southern part of India, who constantly remained in that state. For 11 months, it is recorded in his life. He was in a state of complete samadhi. And to avoid the trouble given by the urchins of the day, he simply jumped into a well, remained there for 11 full months. Think of that. Till white ants completely ate away both the flesh of both the legs. And when he came out, people were wonderstruck how he could survive. And we have shown to the world, challenged the world, that this can be attained, and you also can attain it now and here. That is the challenge of the rishis. It is not monopoly of anybody, anytime, any place. Anyopyevam yo vidathyatmameva. That is the last punchline in the Kathopanishad. This great wisdom was imparted to Nachiketa, the qualified aspirant by the Brahma Vidyacharya Yama, and Nachiketa, attaining this wisdom, crossed beyond death, attained to the superconscious state of transcendental awareness, and anybody else, anywhere, anytime, can also attain this, provided he or she follows the same discipline. That is the scientific challenge of the ancient rishis. This is a very, very important concept in Vedanta and Indian wisdom. It is across all systems of Indian philosophy. Om. And A-U-M in Sanskrit, A, U, and Ma. A plus U by Sandhi in the Vyakarana in grammar becomes O, and Ma remains and O. Now these three letters A, U, and Ma have been mapped on to Jagrata, Swapna, Sushupti, three states of consciousness. And we will just show how these three states can be mapped on to the three bodies. Vedanta says it is not the physical body alone that you have, Sthula Sharira, inside which you have the mental body, Sukshma Sharira, subtle body, and interior to that you have Karana Sharira, causal body. So these three letters can be mapped on to the three states of awareness, Jagrata, Swapna, Sushupti. They can be mapped on once again to the three Shariras, and they can be mapped once again to the 5 shells or koshas that I have tried to map on to the 7 loka, sapta loka, and to Shat Chakra. So you have 3, 3, 3, 5, 6, 7. This is a kind of map which is approximately possible to conceive. This I prepared this myself just to have an idea how various systems of Indian wisdom have evolved their own paradigms in their own different ways, how they could be understood. A-U-Ma, waking, dream, deep sleep, Jagrata, Swapna, Sushupti, gross, subtle, and causal, Sthula, Sukshma, Karana, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. How do you map them? Annamaya is Sthula, gross. Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, together as a group is a subtle, Sukshma. Anandamaya is the causal. And if you map it onto the Shat Chakras, because we can approximately visualize these chakras in our body, the Mooladhara could correspond to the waking of the gross, Swadhisthana and Manipura, Anahata Vishuddha to the subtle, and Agnya to the causal. And if you map this onto the Sapta Loka, this is also a very interesting concept in Indian wisdom, because you should remember the Loka is spatial, whereas the consciousness and Shatchakra, Avasthatraya, these are mental and subtle, largely. And therefore, spatial and temporal and beyond spatial temporal, space-time, they have to be clearly mapped. So they conceived a loka, a spatial description of these various concepts of Annamaya, etc. So the Bhur Loka, which is the loka in which all of us are, which is called the Earth, this planet Earth, the Martya Loka, the Bhur Loka, which is called the Karma Bhumi, in which the souls come to work their karma. Then you have the Bhuvarloka, which is called the interstellar space, which space scientists know. Then you have the Swarloka, which can correspond to the Manomaya, in which you dream dreams. When you dream dreams, what is the spatial correspondence of what you dream? Because you dream ideas, concepts, which are nothing but mental objects. This is a very important idea in Indian spiritual wisdom. Gross objects are in the outspace, and subtle objects called thoughts, concepts, imaginations are in the subtle space. They call it Chitta Akasha. Just like you have Mahakasha in the outside space, Chitta Akasha. So the Swarloka, Bhur, Bhuvaswa. Then you cross over to still subtler space, in which you enter the consciousness space. Chidakasha. The entry to the consciousness space is Vijnanamaya, which corresponds to Mahaloka, Jana, and Tapa. And beyond that is the Satyaloka, which is the Anandamaya. For every one of the inner visions which you have, even in daily life, in dream and deep sleep, they should correspond a certain space. The idea being space and time being together as a continuum, as Einstein showed. Whenever there is time, there is also space. Many people ask what happens after death. The soul goes to various lokas and so on. Are they true? They can be justified. Swami Adbhutanandaji, a miracle of Sri Ramakrishna, was absolutely and totally unlettered, once said, if there is a time after death, there should also be space after death. Look at the wisdom. If you say time after death, how do you know this? When you say after death, obviously you conceive of a time after death. If there is time after death, there should be space after death. So this space is being conceived as Bhur, Bhuvaswa, Mahajanahata Satyam. And every one of us knows how the Gayatri Mantra begins with Bhur, Om, Bhur, Bhuvaswa, etc. Then the Shatchakra, the Mooladhara, can correspond to the Annamaya, the gross. Swadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata Vishuddha, to the subtle. Ultimately, the Agya, which is the causal. Now, at the top, you have states which are beyond all this. This is a unique contribution of the Indian spiritual wisdom. It may take perhaps millennia for the Western world to catch it up. Because it's based on anubhuti, realization, not to be judged by gadgets, with EEG and all the instruments, because no instrument can reach there, although instruments can reveal the state in which they are. Your breathing stops, your heart stops. It has been experimented. The Kaivalya Dhama, Swami Kovalayananda made an experiment long ago in which a yogi, he said he simply hid himself inside a cave and then said experiments were done. The ECG slowly vibrate, and then completely became flat. And everybody was scared. It means total death. Disciple said, don't worry, at a particular point of time, again, he'll come back. He came back laughing and walked away. So this has been proved in India and shown, demonstrated by hundreds of thousands of spiritual people, not one or two, over millennia after millennia. That is why this country is still surviving the tapobala, the power of those rishis. So, A-U-Ma, 3 matras as they call. Beyond there is amatra without matra. Jagrat, Sushupti, 3 states of consciousness. Beyond there is the 4th, which is called the Turiya, transcendental consciousness. Gross, total and causal, Sukshma, Karana, Sharira. Beyond the Sharira Atita, beyond. Then we have the Pancha Atma, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. Beyond this Panchakosha Vilakshana Atma, different from this, then Bhurubhuvaswa Mahajana Tapasatyam, beyond this Lokatita, beyond the Loka, and Mooladhara Swadhisthana Manipura Anahata Vishuddha Agya. Beyond that is the Sahasrara, in which you have the full blast of realization to attain the transcendental consciousness. Now, a quick comparison between the modern terminology of conscious, unconscious, and superconscious. Remember, all these are only approximate mappings. They are totally different paradigms and systems. But if we, in the modern world, try to understand these ancient concepts in terms of what is prevalent, it could be as follows. The Yoga Vedanta perspective. You have one gross, which is unconscious, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya. Remember, Vedanta classifies even mental activity as unconscious. Whereas the Western thinking and the psychologists will say that Manomaya is conscious. No, you are not conscious even in that state because they are completely guided by the unconscious impressions. The first sprout of consciousness, Ankura, it sprouts in Vijnanamaya. This is called conscious. Only when you stay at the level of Vijnanamaya, you can be called conscious. Not before that. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya is still in the state of unconscious sleep. That's why the Bhagavad Gita says the yogi is always awake when everybody is asleep. That means unless there is the awakening of the Vijnanamaya, which is done through Gayatri Mantra, Dhyo Yona Prachodayat, Dhi in the Gayatri Mantra, Medha in the Medha Sutram of the Vedas, Prajna used in the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, Prajna Loka, Pratambhara Prajna, and the Buddhi Guha in Vedanta. All of them mean a subtle perception, the capacity by which the human mind is able to intuit higher spiritual truths. This is the Vijnanamaya in which you first get awakened. Uttishtata, Jagrata, Swamiji said from the Kathopanishad, Jagrata, awaken means rise to the level of Vijnanamaya, which is the Anahata. And then Anandamaya is the super conscious. Now, when they come to space, what is space is something which is undefined, as you know. And Einstein has clearly shown that space and time form a continuum. That is the special theory of relativity. After 10 years of struggle thereafter, he came upon a fantastic, one of the most outstanding discoveries of the modern times, the general theory of relativity, in which he showed space, time, and matter form a continuum. The presence of matter distorts and warps space-time structure. Curvature of space-time is a fantastic discovery, which he used to interpret the theory of gravitation. In Vedanta perspective, we talk about three kinds of space. The Mahakasha, the physical outer space, in which objects exist. Remember, once again, Einstein showed, and Vedanta showed long ago, objects are not in space as container contained, but objects in space are inextricably intertwined as a continuum. Einstein said, we'll quote it after some time, if all the matter in the universe vanishes, Newtonian physics earlier said, space and time alone will remain. But I have shown in the theory of relativity that space and time will also vanish. Space, time, matter form a continuum, and they either rise together or fall together. Vedanta long ago added one more called consciousness, which I want to stress in this talk. Now, what about thoughts? Thoughts can be considered as mental objects, or to put it conversely, objects outside can be conceived as externalized thought. This is a revolutionary and devastating idea which has been propagated, used, believed in, and lived by in ancient India. What you see outside is only a projection of your own mind. The extreme philosophical views called idealism, subjective idealism, and still farther solipsism in the Western philosophy says objects outside are only mental projections. They call it Manaspandana, the vibration. Dr. Ravindra was mentioning Akasha and Prana. Swami Vivekananda elaborately discussed this. It's only the vibration of prana in Akasha which produces matter. So inner space, the mental space, is occupied by thoughts. If objects remain in the outer space, physical space, what is the space which spans the inner objects called thoughts? There should be a space. You may ask, is it an imagination? No. What happens in dreams? Does not everybody dream? You see elephants and cars and people moving around in dreams. What is the space in which they move? You have to have a space in which you have accommodated huge objects there. That is the mental space called Chitta Akasha. Beyond that is the consciousness per se. Remember, I am not confusing life with consciousness as the Western world normally does. By consciousness, I mean Chaitanya. It is better to use the word Chaitanya, which is a super conscious, which is called the Chidakasha, beyond body and mind. Now, let us map it onto the modern perspective. We have discussed rather elaborately and very succinctly the various Indian philosophical thoughts, yoga, tantra, Vedanta in particular. Now, 1905, this is common knowledge. Einstein came up with a revolutionary idea of the special theory of relativity, in which he proved that space and time are not two different entities. There's a concept of space-time continuum. They form a continuum, and space and time are intertwined. So the world in which we live is not a three-dimensional space world, it is a four-dimensional world. In a very simple way, if you look at it, I move, I take my car and move, I go to various places. So I move on the x-axis, y-axis, z-axis, I can move up, I can move along. Now, suppose I don't move at all. In this corona times, most people are stay put at home. Are they moving? They may not be moving in space, but they're moving in time. After a couple of years, you see them, you are in corona. You're in quarantine. Oh, you've become very old. Your hair has grown gray. Your beard has grown. So what is the movement there? It is the movement in time. So you move in space and time together. So how do you know you're moving in time? The difference between space and time is that space movement can be backward and forward, but time you can't move backward in time. Time has to move from the past through the present into the future. That's the movement of time called Time's Arrow by Arthur Eddington, the author of a famous book in the 30s, The Nature of the Physical World. I recommend it to all of you to read this book. Very simple language, so humorous, without much of mathematics. The arrow of time, time moving from the past through the present into the future. This is conceived in physics as a double cone. You have a cone, and as you move forward, you're moving towards the future, infinite future, absolute future. Then you go backward, you are in past. So from the past, you move and move and move. At a particular point, they call the present. There's only a dot, a Euclidean point without any dimension, and then you move on to the future. This is called it light cone or a time cone in physics. And you go back to Shiva's Damaru. All of you know Mahadeva Shiva is considered Mahakala. He is great time. What does he do? He has a Damaru, which is a double conical structure. He holds the center, which is the present, and then manipulates the past and the future. That's the allegorical idea of the Damaru. So catch hold of the time, the present. Now, if you can stop time just now in the present, you are in the infinite and absolute. So the whole attempt in Vedanta, in the sadhana part of Vedanta, how you can remain in eternal present. The Vipassana meditation of the modern times, adapted from the Buddhistic meditation, talks about how you can remain in the present. Don't move to the past or the future. The past is dead as memory. The future is an imagination, non-existent. The present is the only reality. And the present has no dimension. So if you can stop time just in the present, you are in Brahman, you are the absolute. So there has been attempts in India to have a kind of sadhana in which you find the gap between two thoughts. See how much deeply they have entered into sadhana. In India, philosophy is not a mere talk or a seminar, not academics. You have to integrate with your life and then grow in such a way you have the truth in the palm of your hands, as they say. So if you find a gap between two thoughts, you are in Brahman. So moving from the past through the present into the future, the Damaru idea, then you ask, how do you know you're moving from the past to the future? Experiments have been conceived, thought experiments. Suppose you are put in a black box, completely blacked out from the external world. How do you know you're moving towards the future? There's no clock. There is a concept in physics called entropy, which is a degree of disorganization. If you measure the entropy, if the entropy is increasing, then you're moving towards the future. The second law of thermodynamics says the entropy of a closed system is always on the increase. So don't get perturbed, the world is chaotic. The world will continue to be chaotic till it reaches the maximum amount of chaos. which is called the thermodynamic depth. So what's happening now? Let's get prepared for chaos. From chaos emerges order. There's another theory in physics, the famous book by Prigogine, the Nobel laureate, Order Out of Chaos. So you have the concept of space-time continuum. Einstein generalized this to space-time matter continuum. The curvature of space-time in the presence of matter, leading to Einstein's new theory of gravitation that revolutionized our concept of space, time, and matter. Einstein said that the presence of matter, massive objects, curves space-time. The curvature which he called gravitation. Is gravitation a property of an object? Newton thought two objects attract each other. Question arose, why only attraction, why not repulsion? Gravitation is the only force in nature among the four important fundamental forces, electromagnetic, weak and strong. Gravitation is the only force which only attracts. Why? We don't know. And how is the two objects attract each other? This is a very unscientific concept. Suppose you say there's a ghost inside, or you say the Divine Mother Kali sees that they're attracted, you will say you are very primitive, you are unscientific. This is what Newton said, and people acclaimed him as one of the greatest of scientists. Because you do not know. When you don't know something, you put a postulate, a hypothesis. Einstein was very uncomfortable with this idea, following Swami Vivekananda, who said, one of the fundamental doctrines of science, through which science has progressed, the explanation of something should come within the system, not from outside. Two objects get attracted, don't invoke a ghost, don't invoke something from outside, they should be something intrinsic. Einstein laughed and said, nothing is happening to these bodies. If you put two objects, two pendulum, for example, in a string, and they are separate like this. When you bend this stick on which the pendulums are strung, these appear to come together. They are not coming together by attraction. They appear to be coming together because of the nature of the curvature of space-time. Bertrand Russell has a small book called the ABC of Relativity. Those of you who are interested, please read this book. So lucidly written about relativity. He gives the following example. In a dark night, several travelers are trying to move up a mountain. And the mountain path is naturally curved. There's a beacon at the top. And these travelers are carrying a lantern in their hands. And an onlooker from a plane sees there's a beacon at the top, and so many lights are going round and round and round. So he concludes, like Newton did, or Galileo did, that the sun is the center, and the planets, because of gravitational force, they are going round and round. When the sunlight came, the onlooker saw nothing is happening to anybody. It is because the paths are curved, they appear to be moving in a curved paths which are called orbits. Bertrand Russell says very humorously, in this example analogy, the beacon at the top represents the sun, and the various travelers with lantern, the planets, the curved paths of the orbits of the planets, and the coming of daylight is the emergence of Einstein. So this is how Einstein revolutionized the whole concept of space, time, and matter. As I told you just now, Einstein was asked, can you explain relativity in a simple language? He thought for a while and said, in Newtonian physics, it was thought when all the matter in the universe vanishes, space and time alone will remain. But what the theory of relativity has shown is that space and time will also vanish along with matter. This means that what we call matter is not in space-time, related as contained container, but space-time matter form one continuum. This is a very important idea to note. we always have this container-contained relationship. Space is here, something is contained. There's a glass which is empty. You pour some water. Water is the contained, and this glass is the container. And space-time matter does not share the relationship of container-contained, but they form one continuum. Now, compare it with the Vedanta perspective. The continuum is described in the Taittiriya Upanishad, as I told you, the Pancha Atma, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. I go back to the original mantras in the Taittiriya Upanishad, where they are described as 5 selves, and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad talks about Otaprota, very difficult term to translate into English, interpenetrating, one overlapping with the other, and overwhelmingly infilling, Purna. The word used in the Taittiriya Upanishad, interior and infilling, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. So these are the mantras. Each of the layers of consciousness, Annamaya, the outermost, Anandamaya, the innermost, is called the Atma Consciousness, the original text, showing that the Vedanta perspective of the Upanishad, the Rishis, is that there is a continuum of consciousness from the material, Annamaya, through the Pranamaya, Manomaya, higher intuitive Vijnanamaya, finally to the Anandamaya. So remember this and meditate upon this. The physical body which I have, and the mind which thinks, whatever it is, and the higher mind which intuits, they form a continuum to the higher and higher minds, consciousness, ending in Anandamaya and beyond. It is not that the physical material breaks and there's a gap or a hiatus and the spiritual begins. The material, mental, and spiritual form one continuum of consciousness. The original Upanishadic text is in Sanskrit. Anyantara Atma Pranamaya Tenaisha Purnaha. They talk about the Annamaya, which is the physical. Then the Upanishad says, Anyaha, different from this. Antaratma, interior to this, is Pranamaya. Annamaya Atma is the physical body. There is a Atma which is different from this, interior to this, called the Pranamaya. Then comes the punchline, Tenaisha Purnaha. This is filled by this. Tena, by this, Esha Purnaha. Annamaya is Purna, filled, overwhelmingly infilled. Purna by the Pranamaya. It's a kind of telescoping. Annamaya, interior to this, different from this, is the Pranamaya, which overlaps and infills and overwhelms. Similarly for every other self. Interior to this Pranamaya is the Manomaya. Anyantara Atma Manomaya. Anyaha, different from the Pranamaya. Antaratma, interior. Manomaya, which is the mind self. Tenaisha Purnaha. This mental self, the Manomaya, overwhelmingly infills the Pranamaya, which in turn overwhelms and infills the Annamaya. So the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, interior to each other, infilling, overwhelming, interpenetrating, and fused into one continuum. Then go further. Anyantara Atma Vijnanamaya. Anyaha, different from that. Different from what? From the Annamaya, Pranamaya, and Manomaya. Antaratma, interior, Vijnanamaya. The Vijnana, real consciousness self, which begins there And Tenaisha Purnaha. The Vijnanamaya self overwhelms and interpenetrates and overlaps, infills the Manomaya, which in turn overwhelms and infills the Pranamaya, which in turn overwhelms and infills the Annamaya. So you have the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya, each interpenetrating, infilling, Otaprota, interpenetrating, forming one fusion of a continuum. And lastly, Anyontara Atma Anandamaya. You have the Anandamaya, which overwhelms and infills the Vijnanamaya, which in turn overwhelms and infills and interpenetrates the Manomaya, which in turn overwhelms and infills the Pranamaya, which in turn overwhelms and infills the Annamaya. So think of the whole thing. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya, telescoping as it were into one another and forming a fusion, each independent. Anyontara. So how the idea of an autonomy of each of the selves, which is to be seen, the mind is autonomous, the body itself is autonomous. Medical science has proved the body has its own language, body has its own consciousness, body has its own sensitivity apart from the mind. The mind has its sensitivity and the intellect has its own independence. So each of the selves, although they're autonomous selves governed by their own individual laws of consciousness, fusing together into one integral whole, which is the continuum. I finish with this epistemology, Vedanta epistemology, and the modern epistemology of consciousness. What is matter? How is it related to consciousness? Vedanta says matter is something which is perceived by consciousness. The technical terms are consciousness is called Jnata, the eternal subject, knower. Matter is Gaya, the object known. And the process of knowing, which is called knowledge, subject-object relationship called Jnana. This is called Triputi. The question, is such a definition acceptable to science? May we say that the notion of observer playing an essential role in observation in quantum mechanics comes close to Vedanta perspective? There was a time that scientists will frown at the word consciousness. Neuroscientists would not accept this word. I asked one of the topmost neuroscientists who is working in the Dalai Lama's Mind Life Society, Richardson, in New York. He said, do you people, neuroscientists, accept the word consciousness? He said, yes, Swami, we have no other choice. We used to frown at that word. Now it is used freely in books and papers in neuroscience. Now, can you say that matter is something which is known to consciousness? The idea of observation in quantum mechanics, in which the observer plays a very important role in observation, can it come close to the idea of the Jnata and the Gaya and Jnana coming to Triputi? May we draw a parallel between the epistemological perspectives of modern science and ancient Vedanta? In a sense, yes. The three worldviews, Jnata and Gaya, can be considered as curls in the unbroken continuum of knowledge. As Einstein said, matter is a curl or a curvature in space-time. This is Advaita Vedanta. Jnata, the notion of consciousness as it were, subsumes both Gaya and Jnanam, which are like waves of the infinite ocean which remain as pure consciousness, undifferentiated, one without a second. Advaita, Vishuddha Vijnana Swarupa, Ekameva Advitiyam. You can refer to Ashtavakra Samhita, series of verses in which the Rishi says, I am that infinite ocean in which like waves, jivas and jagat come and get subsumed. The third paradigm, the Jnanam alone remains. Jnata and Gaya remain in that infinite ocean, which is calm and tranquil, auspicious and non-dual, absolute awareness, Shantam, Shivam, Advaitam, Mandika Upanishad, very similar to the Buddhistic perspective interpreted independently in modern times by people like J. Krishnamurti. Thank you so much for listening to me patiently. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful, dynamic talk. You explained Pancha Kosha, Shat Chakra, and 3 state of consciousness with Sapta Loka and how it is interrelated, and with the Upanishad explanation. Thank you so much for your dynamic lectures. Now I'm sure why people will repeatedly invite you for the so many places. I really enjoyed listening to your talk, sir, and I learned more about this information. Thank you so much, sir. Namaste.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we have no more questions. Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am, for chairing this session. And thank you all the participants. We will now take a break and we'll return back by 2:30 using the same link. We have another keynote by Dr. George Northoff. Please join us. Same link.
Thank you all. Thank you.